Hey, what's up, guys? It's your homie Rebo here, and I just wanted to give a little quick perspective on the entire notion of I can't stand that entire sentiment where a lot of people talk about suicide is a permanent solution to temporary problems. And for one, the main problem with that issue is the fact that it's simply not true for a significant amount of people who deal with chronic suicide ideation. Because for one, people who deal with chronic long-term suicidal ideation are dealing with issues that are causing them to be suicidal, that are not at all quote unquote temporary problems. Like, for example, a lot of people with chronic suicide ideation deal with chronic severe mental illness, such as like personality disorders, like borderline personality disorder, that's a prime example, bipolar disorder, severe chronic treatment resistant depression, severe anxiety, etc., etc. So you get the point. And then most chronic mental illnesses most mental illnesses, even if they are treatable, and even sometimes to the point of remission, like with borderline personality disorder, for example, because statistically, if people with BPD receive sufficient treatment, like with DBT training, chemotherapy, EMDR to address trauma, etc., then statistically 80% of people diagnosed with BPD will achieve remission, which is a very beautiful statistic, and it gives hope to people like me. But the point still stands. It's like most mental illnesses are not fucking temporary problems. Most mental illnesses are lifelong conditions that people suffer through, and people with chronic mental illness, or another example, like while we're on the topic, is something I personally deal with, is chronic physical illness. People who deal with chronic physical illness, like autoimmune diseases, lupus, Crohn's diseases, I personally deal with, etc. Also understand the idea that yes, like chronic physical illness is not at all a temporary problem. Like many of them, such as Crohn's disease, are lifelong conditions that people really suffer through, and statistically, are likely to induce suicide. Like, for example, statistically, people who deal with chronic pain are 9 times more likely to consider suicide. And out of people who deal with chronic pain, anywhere from 6 to 17% have seriously considered suicide at some point in time. And also statistically, a serious risk factor for people who deal with chronic illness and chronic pain is I guess it's the sentiment of like lost hope, essentially, especially immediately upon getting diagnosed with a disorder. That is the number one crucial time where people who deal with chronic pain and chronic illness are likely to attempt. So again, chronic physical illness, chronic mental illnesses are not temporary problems that are just gonna go away with fucking wishful thinking, therapy, and fucking self-love. With no amount of self-love or love from other people is gonna remove the pain that comes from dealing with a chronic physical illness and all the side effects, the loneliness that comes with it, all the missed opportunities. Many people who deal with chronic pain are in so much pain to the point where they spend days bedridden at a time and can't even work and shit and make their own money. So please explain to me how that's a temporary problem that's just gonna go away, especially when we live in a world that is increasingly becoming less empathetic, and a lot of people like you would think would be who can sympathize with physical pain can't like for example with mental illness. We already understand that a lot of people don't understand, because society up until 20 years ago, mental illness was still a taboo. Mental health was still a taboo subject, especially therapy. And although we gotten better, many people are still ignorant towards mental illness. But in my experience, as someone who deals with both a chronic physical illness, like chronic pain, and severe mental illness, like a slew of mental illness, I can also assure you that a lot of people share the same sentiments towards this physical disabilities too. So yeah. Yeah, and then while we're also on the topic, let's talk about other marginalized groups that deal with like long-term, permanent, worldly problems that are not all just temporary problems that are going to go away with medication or kumbaya, like a kumbaya sense of camaraderie. Like, for example, let's talk about LGBT people. LGBT people, such as myself, that's another marginalized group that I'll go on to that are on the topic that deals with a lot of quote unquote, like that issues are not just temporary problems, because how is discrimination for who you are a temporary problem? How is living in a world that wasn't meant that living in a world where religion is, most people are religious, and not only are most people religious, but people are more than willing to use their religions as a reason to justify hate towards people like you. Fucking, like, how is that a temporary problem? How is the fact that we currently, like, we're currently under a political, like, government regime where the president is directly making laws affecting people like me, trans people, coming for gay marriage and all types, and job and LGBT discrimination laws are being removed. And again, of course, that's going to affect us mentally. And then you can say, well, it's always good to have hope, but which is true. But again, hope is like, we need real action. Hope is not going to change that. Like, statistically speaking, LGBT people are 3 to 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than cisgender people statistically. And out of all the LGBT community, trans people specifically are the most susceptible to suicide, with a 47% suicide attempt rate amongst the population. And statistically speaking, on the topic, trans people are statistically 9 to 10 times more likely to consider suicide compared to their cisgender, to our cisgender cohorts, like, you know, our peers who are cisgender straight, statistically. So yeah, statistically speaking, 42% of transgender adults in the U.S. attempt suicide, and 81% of transgender adults in the U.S. have considered suicide within the last year. And out of all mentally ill people in general, just generally speaking, 44% of people who die by suicide successfully had a diagnosed chronic mental illness. So yeah, and it's fun to be a statistic. I honestly believe that the entire reason, the main reason behind the sentiment of suicide is a permanent solution to temporary problems, and it's really just wishful thinking, and people not really knowing how to, like, people not really being willing to, or it's not even that people aren't willing to help when it comes to people who have real issues. It's more so people not knowing how to help. So as a result, rather than actually addressing the issue, people will rather, just kumbaya together, and then pretty much give you like this pretentious, condescending as false sense of optimism, or blind, a quote unquote sense of blind optimism, and hope that you get better, rather than really sitting with someone who's vulnerable, because let's be honest, the society at large is ignorant when it comes to emotional intelligence and mental illness for the most part. Like I said earlier, we're like up until around 20 years ago, therapy was still taboo, and mental health is very much, even in current times, still taboo for the most part. So yeah, that's one of the reasons behind this whole notion behind this fake ass fucking pretentious ass idea that everyone who's considered suicide, it's like everyone who considers suicide problems are just temporary, which is not at all true. For many people, even statistically, it's like most people especially people who deal with chronic suicide ideation like myself, our problems, we deal with circumstances that are not going to change with any amount of wishful thinking, any amount of Disney-fied ass sense of kumbaya fucking optimism. Like, this is real life. Like, in the real world, not everyone gets a happy ending. That's all I want to say. Thank you, J Rev. I love you all. To anyone who may take the time out of their day to really sit and watch my content, especially like this type of content, content that's more serious in nature and like more bloggy-ish social commentary type of content. I just want to say thank you to being willing, like to really taking the time to listen to me rant. I love you all. Thank you.